The city of Bengaluru, styled as the Silicon Valley of India, is turning out to be India's urban nightmare. Located a little over 3,000 feet above sea level, it has been one of the favorite haunts of the British, and now the city that showcases India's tech success is collapsing. Corruption, unplanned development, encroachments, loss of green cover, and apathy on part of the BBMP have only made this city an urban disaster. A recent report by the Karnataka State Natural Disaster Monitoring Committee shows that Bengaluru is unprepared for the monsoon season, which hasn't even begun officially. 2 people have lost their lives in recent days, including an Infosys techie. Several low-lying areas were flooded following a bout of pre-monsoon showers in the city. Now, this report that we're quoting says 226 regions in Bengaluru are vulnerable to floods if it sees rainfall of 70 mm a day. Most of these areas are in the south and west of the city. Even its central business district is vulnerable. Bengaluru's governing body, the BBMP, has not had elections for the last 2 years. The Palike is run by a BBMP commissioner who directly reports to the state government in the absence of an elected city legislative body. The natural drain valleys of the city have been encroached upon by builders and land sharks. The remodeling of the drain, which was launched with much fanfare as the solution to the water-logging woes of the city, has turned out to be an inefficient network of storm water drains. Destruction of lakes and occupation of lake beds by the real estate mafia has only added to the woes of Bengalurians. 17,000 crore rupees were spent on flyovers and underpasses. You heard that right, 17,000 crore. And yet, the drain systems associated with the underpasses have been built in an unscientific manner, resulting in massive waterlogging. A combination of factors have led to the KCNDMC to conclude that 226 locations in Bengaluru are vulnerable to flooding during the monsoons. The question that really needs to be asked is, will anything ever change for the tax-paying residents of Bengaluru? Is nobody ever going to be held accountable, not just for the massive inconvenience that Bengalurians face on a daily basis, but what about the precious lives that have been lost? Is absolutely nobody accountable?
The Karnataka State Natural Disaster Management Committee has just recently sent a report to the BBMP where it has identified 226 locations in Bengaluru which are believed to be vulnerable to heavy rainfalls, which means that these places that they have identified can flood any minute when it starts raining in Delhi. They've identified from 1 millimeter rain to 3 millimeter rain. They've divided the areas into such details. Right now, we are standing in a double road in Shanti Nagar, which is also one of the locations which has been deemed as vulnerable to rains. In these 226 locations, east is believed to be the worst affected, where 61 spots have been designated as vulnerable spots, where west Bangalore has 40, south Bangalore has 40, Madhevpura has 24 spots, RR Nagar has 23 spots, Bommanalli has 24 and Yelanka has 11 spots. Now, these are the list of places that the Disaster Management Committee has given to the BBMP. Now, the BBMP claims that 70% of these areas have been cleaned up, work has been done in these places, and these places will not be vulnerable to floods in the coming days. But in the last few days, the pre-monsoon showers that we have seen has already exposed the BBMP, where we've seen the death of close to 2 people, one Banu Rekha, a techie, and Lokesh, a resident of Sempanka Agrahara. Now, these locations that have been identified are being monitored, and work is also been going on, is what the BBMP has told us. Now, it remains to be seen how they will tackle this, because where we are is double road, and at the end of this road, if I can tell my camera person to show, is the Lalbagh area, and Lalbagh has a small hill, and this becomes an inclined road, and this place is vulnerable to flooding because it's an inclined plane, so there are chances of water clogging in these places, and that is why this has been identified as one of the spots by the BBMP. Now, the citizens are worried that how will the BBMP tackle this, because the recent pre-monsoon showers has already exposed them. So it now remains to be seen how the monsoons will be in Bengaluru, keeping in mind that the pre-monsoon showers have already given us a stark reality of what is coming in store for the Bengalurians. This is Wajihulla with Madan for News 9.
This is a veritable nightmare for the people of Bengaluru, who happen to be among the highest taxpayers in the country. Yet, nothing seems to ever change. Governments come and go, yet for Bangaloreans, it is the same old sad and tragic story. Because remember, this is not just about inconvenience, lives are being lost. All right, let's throw this open to our guests. Of course, as I mentioned at the start of the show, in the studio with me is my colleague Verghese Abraham. In fact, he comes from the state of Karnataka and understands the state better than most of us. We also have on the show my colleague Wajihulla, who joins us from Bengaluru. Raj Bhagat, WRI India Geo Analytics, is with us, and completing the panel is Satya Sankaran, founder, Council for Active Mobility. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Verghese, I want to start with you. You know, I don't even know where to begin, because there seems to be so much wrong with, urban planning in Bengaluru and the way infrastructure has been developed over the years and decades. At the start of the show, we talked about how this is a cauldron of corruption, unplanned development, encroachments, loss of green cover, and huge apathy on part of the BBMP, which, by the way, hasn't even had an election in 2 years. And the result is a veritable urban disaster for the residents of Bangalore. As somebody who understands the city really well, please explain to our viewers and put into perspective for them just why Bangalore, India's so-called Silicon Valley, is such a mess today.
Well, it is very simple. It is very simple because the root of all this is corruption. When Bengaluru began to grow, especially from 2000, when we were talking about the IT success story, there was infrastructure that was built haphazardly. There was a lot of money that was allocated. There were talks about saying that Bengaluru requires huge flyovers, it requires underpasses, and of course you have infrastructure projects like the metro that was put in place. So there was a spree of approving projects. Once they started doing that, the residential quarters of the city became a very big issue because the space started shrinking there. That is when you had the real estate boom coming in, and a lot of areas on the then limits of Bengaluru in the 2000s started to expand. And when it started to expand, what we noticed is that land sharks as well as real estate mafia, they were hand in glove with certain elements within the administration, whether it was the BBMP, whether it was the BDA or the Lake Development Authority or even the state government, and they tend to have in fact encroached upon some of the natural drains in the city. And not to forget, these natural drains were connected with the lakes of the city. Most of these lakes are interconnected in such a manner that if the lake in one part of the city is about to overflow, the water moves through a channel of drains and moves to another lake where the water is less. So the water keeps in fact moving from one area of the city to the other. Now these channel drains were blocked by unprecedented development because nobody was monitoring as to whether the consequent tanks between the lakes were being dried out by land mafia and land sharks. They were being appropriated by them. There were documents that were created over its ownership, and people just started building huge buildings because rent became one of the most lucrative revenues and incomes for a lot of people. So there was unscrupulous characters who were involved in the development of the city, and then suddenly they saw, after probably 20-25 years of this kind of mismanagement, what we see is a city which has lost on its environment, its green cover has been destroyed, its areas, its lakes technically have just disappeared. Probably from the time from 1947 onwards, we would have seen at least 200 lakes. I'm
This
talking about
was
small
the
towns.
city of lakes.
It's a city of lakes, and its entire infrastructure was supposed to have developed around its lakes because that was the drain system. But they have not carried out with that kind of an understanding of planning, and this haphazard development also resulted in a survey. And when you look at these surveys, interestingly enough, it's mostly the big tech companies that have tend to have gone ahead and encroached upon these drains. if you go into the kata system that we call, who owns the land and why it is, you find that there are certain areas which are technically encroachments, and they've given an A kata, which is to say that everything is okay when it comes to its legal process. And then you see the government going and demolishing it because there are people, lake activists and environmentalists, who've gone against those who have issued those A katas. So why is it that so much of corruption is there when it comes to this? And now you have suddenly realized that 226 locations in the city, and these are within the business districts of the city as well, that are vulnerable to flooding. And it's all because bad development and encroachment of the existing natural drains.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, and thank you so much for that very comprehensive analysis, Verghese, of all that has gone horribly wrong in the city of Bengaluru.